Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The world spun around Barry Allen, and he could feel the sharp twinge in his legs as they pumped faster than they'd ever gone before. His breath came in short, controlled bursts, each one a calculated motion as he fought to maintain his balance, his speed, and his focus. Central City blurred into a sea of flashing lights and indistinct shape. People, buildings, and cars became mere streaks in his vision as he pushed beyond the limits of what any human should be capable of. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Barry knew he had only a few seconds left before disaster struck. The power grid was destabilizing, and if he didn't reach the central generator in time, the entire city could be plunged into chaos, a rolling blackout that would shut down hospitals, schools, and emergency services. His body screamed in protest as he accelerated, forcing himself to tap deeper into the speed force. Suddenly, a bright flash of light erupted ahead, brighter than anything he'd ever seen, blinding him momentarily. Before Barry could react, the world around him twisted and warped, the streaks of light becoming jagged and chaotic. He felt a surge of energy unlike anything he'd ever encountered, and then nothing. When his vision cleared, the world had stopped spinning, but something was very wrong. The streets of Central City had been replaced by cobblestone alleys dimly lit by the flickering orange glow of gas lamps. Barry stumbled to a halt, disoriented, and took in his surroundings. The buildings were old, their architecture a blend of Gothic and Victorian. Carriages drawn by horses rattled down the streets, and people in formal, outdated attire hurried along the sidewalks, unaware of his sudden appearance. This wasn't Dread Central City. This wasn't his time. Barry's heart raced, not from the exertion of speed, but from the realization that he had somehow traveled backward in time. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of confusion, and instinctively looked at his wrist where his suit said GPS and temporal sensors were located. The readings were erratic, the numbers flickering wildly. What the hell? Before he could fully process what had happened, a familiar landmark caught his eye. Rising against the night sky, silhouetted against the distant clouds, was the unmistakable figure of Wayne Manor. Barry felt a chill creep down his spine as the pieces began to click together in his mind. This wasn't just any moment in time. He was in Gotham, and if his calculations were correct, he had landed in a night that would change the course of history. The night Bruce Wayne's parents were killed. The weight of the realization hit him hard, a knot forming in his chest. He knew this timeline. He knew the pain that had shaped Bruce into the man he became, into Batman. But now standing here, Barry had the chance to change it. He had the power to save them, to stop Thomas and Martha Wayne from being gunned down in front of their son. But should he? Barry Seal's mind raced with the possibilities. If he could prevent their deaths, Bruce would never become Batman. He'd never live through the trauma that haunted him. He wouldn't have to carry the burden of Gotham's darkness on his shoulder. Maybe, just maybe, Bruce could have a normal life, a better life. Barry started moving, his legs carrying him instinctively toward Crime Alley. He didn't need directions. The history of this night was etched into his memory, as much as it was into Bruce's. He could stop it. He could change everything. As he approached the alley, he slowed, his heart pounding in his chest. He heard footsteps echoing off the brick walls, the quiet murmur of conversation. Barry stopped just before the corner and peeked around the edge. There they were, the Waynes, walking hand in hand, laughing softly as they made their way down the alley. And there in the shadows lurked Joe Chill, the man who would take everything from them in a few short seconds. Barry clenched his fists, the speed coursing through his veins, begging him to act. He could rush in, disarm Chill, and whisk the Waynes away before the first gunshot echoed into the night. But then another presence appeared. Barry felt it before he saw it, a ripple in the air, the familiar gravitas that only one man carried. Batman stepped from the shadows, his cape trailing behind him like a dark specter. Barry froze as the Dark Knight's gaze locked onto him. Dante, Batman said, his voice low and steady, filled with warning. Barry blinked, the words catching him off guard. He stepped forward, unsure if he had heard him correctly. Bruce, I can save them. Batman's jaw tightened, his posture rigid, but his eyes beneath the cowl betrayed a flicker of pain. You can too, he replied. Shouldn't. The conflict between them hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Barry took a step closer, lowering his voice. Bruce, I know what this night did to you. I know how much it hurt, but I have the power to stop it. I can give you a life without all of this. He gestured to the dark alley, to the shadows that seemed to cling to Batman like a second skin. A life where you don't have to be this. Batman's stance never wavered. I am who I am because of this night. If you change it, you change everything. Not just for me, for Gotham, for the world. Barry shook his head, his thoughts a whirlwind. But you could be happy. You could have your parents back. And what about the millions of lives Batman has saved? Batman countered, his voice rising slightly. What about the people who depend on me? The criminals who would tear Gotham apart without fear? If you take this away, what happens to them? Barry's frustration boiled over. I can fix it. I can find a way to make it right, to make sure everything works out. Batman's expression darkened, his voice turning cold. You're replaying with forces. You don't understand, Barry. You've done it before and you saw what happened. You want to try again. A shiver ran through Barry as memories of the Flashpoint event surged to the forefront of his mind. He had tried to rewrite history before to save his own mother from death, and the consequences had been disastrous. The timeline had unraveled, lives were changed, and the world had teetered on the brink of chaos. I am not trying to destroy anything, Barry argued. I just want to give you a chance. You don't have to carry this burden anymore. Bruce, you deserve a life too. For a long moment, Batman said nothing. The sounds of the city around them seemed distant, almost muffled. And then slowly, he spoke again, his voice softer, almost resigned. I gave up that life a long time ago, Barry. What I want doesn't matter anymore. Gotham matters, the world matters. The Waynes, they have to die. Barry's sire sank, his chest tightening with the weight of Bruce's words. He wanted to argue, to fight back, to save his friend from a lifetime of pain. But deep down, he knew Bruce was right. Changing this moment could unravel the very fabric of everything they had fought for. Before Barry could respond, a sudden distortion rippled through the alley. The walls shimmered and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. Barry and Batman both staggered as reality flickered, the result of the unstable timeline caused by Barry's presence. Time's destabilizing, Barry muttered, panic rising in his voice. We need to. The distortion intensified, and before they could react, a powerful surge of energy exploded from the alleyway. Barry was thrown back, his body slamming into the brick wall, while Batman remained grounded, fighting against the swirling maelstrom of time and space tearing at the fabric of reality. With a groan, Barry pushed himself up. His mind racing, he had to fix this fast. The distortion pulsed again, a jagged tear in the air between them, crackling with unstable energy. Batman grunted as he fought against the sheer force of the disturbance, but Barry could see the strain in his movements, the slow, inevitable pull of the temporal rift, threatening to suck them both in. Time itself was coming undone, reality fraying at the edges. Barry's mind raced. He had to stabilize the timeline before it collapsed completely, but the energy surging from the tear was wild, chaotic. If he didn't move quickly, they could both be swallowed by the paradox, lost forever in the ripples of a broken timeline. He pushed himself off the wall, forcing his legs to move. The world wobbled around him as he tapped into the speed force again, feeling it surge through his veins. But something felt off. The energy in the alley was distorting even his connection to it, making it harder to focus, harder to control. Bruce, he shouted, his voice barely carrying over the crackling roar of the distortion. Batman glanced at him, his jaw set in a grim line. Tara, I need to run. I can stabilize this, but I have to reset the timeline. You have to trust me. Batman hesitated, his eyes narrowing beneath the cowl. Trust. It was a word they rarely used with one another. There had always been an unspoken understanding, a bond forged through battle and hardship. But trust real. Trust was something else entirely. Do it, Batman growled, bracing himself as the energy swirled around him. Barry didn't waste another second. With a burst of speed, he shot forward, pushing through the distortion, feeling the resistance of the broken timeline, trying to pull him apart. Every step was agony, the fabric of reality warping around him. But he kept going, forcing himself through it. He had to reach the center. He had to close the loop. The speed force roared in his ears as he pushed harder, faster, his body becoming a blur of motion. The images around him flickered, visions of Gotham, of Bruce seeing past, of his own past. He saw Joe Chill in the shadows, the flash of the gun, the blood on the pavement. He saw Bruce as a boy, wide-eyed and terrified, standing over the bodies of his parents. He saw himself running through the streets of Central City, searching for answers, searching for a way to make things right. And then in an instant, it all clicked into place. The energy surged, the distortion crackled, and the tear, in reality, snapped shut. Barry came to a stop, panting heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. The alley was still, the world settling back into its proper place. The rift was gone, time had been restored. He looked up, and there was Batman, standing exactly where he had been before, watching him with those intense, unreadable eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension that had crackled between them earlier was still there, lingering in the air, like the fading echoes of the distortion. "Did it work, Batman?" His voice was low, gruff. Barry nodded, still catching his breath. Yeah, it worked. The timeline's stable again. Batman did respond right away. His gaze shifted to the spot where his parents had died all those years ago, the place where it had all begun. There was no blood on the pavement now, no echoes of that night in the air. But Barry knew the memory was still there. It etched into Bruce's mind as deeply as the pain that had shaped him. "You were right," and Barry said, quietly stepping closer. Couldn't change it. I shouldn't have tried." Batman's jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he turned away from the alley, his cape swirling around him as he began to walk. Barry watched him for a moment, then followed, falling into step beside him. "You still think about them, don't you?" Barry asked after a long silence. Batman didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, his expression unreadable. But finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every day." They walked in silence for a few more blocks, the sounds of the city gradually returning to normal around them. Barry could feel the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on him, the enormity of the choice he'd almost made. He had wanted to help, to save his friend from the pain that had defined his entire life. But in the end, he had realized that it wasn't his decision to make. "Bruce," and Barry said softly, breaking the silence, "if you ever want to talk about it, I am here." Batman's eyes flicked toward him for a brief second, and for the first time in a long while, there was something in them that wasn't hard or distant. It was a fleeting moment, but it was there, a glimmer of something more. "Don't you push your luck, Barry?" Batman muttered, but there was no malice in his tone. Barry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Yeah, figured as much." They reached the edge of Gotham's East End, where the shadows of the city were darkest, and Batman stopped, his gaze scanning the streets, as if searching for something. Barry knew that the look of a man constantly on guard, constantly ready for the next threat. "You sure everything's okay?" Barry asked, glancing around Dana after what just happened. "It's fine," replied. "The timeline. Stable. You did your job." There was a finality to his words, a signal that their conversation was over. Barry nodded, understanding. Batman wasn't here one for long goodbyes or drawn-out conversation. He lived in the shadows, fought in them, thrived in them, and Barry, as much as he wanted to help, knew that there were some things even he couldn't fix. "I'll see you around, Bruce," Barry said, stepping back, preparing to tap into the Speed Force again. Batman didn't respond, his attention already back on the city, his mind focused on the mission ahead. But as Barry took off, speeding away through the night, he caught one last glimpse of his friend standing tall against the darkness, the weight of the past still hanging over him, but no longer crushing him. Barry Allen ran through the streets of Central City, his mind still racing with the events of the night. He had come so close to changing everything, to rewriting a history that wasn't his to rewrite. But in the end, he had realized that some things, no matter how painful, were meant to be. Some choices weren't his to make. As he reached the outskirts of the city, he slowed to a stop, staring out at the horizon, the sun just beginning to rise. He thought of his own mother, of the night she had been taken from him, and of the countless times he had wished he could go back and change it. But now, after everything that had happened, he knew that even if he had the chance, he wouldn't. Some things had to remain as they were, and sometimes the hardest part of being a hero wasn't saving others, it was knowing when not to.